this message more than any other message I've ever heard or preached myself is the one that affects me consciously or unconsciously on a regular basis. In other words, the stuff from this message, really one line in particular, has popped into my head more than any other line I've heard or read or preached ever. And I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that. Before I go any further, I want to give credit where credit is due. This really is built around something one of my favorite preachers, Andy Stanley, said quite a while back. I heard him say something that really stuck with me, and I just couldn't stop thinking about it. And so I hope that what I say today has the same effect on you as it has had on me. That said, all right, there's the disclaimer. Let's jump right in, and let's jump in by playing a little bit of word association. When I say something like American, what's an American? Probably for most of us, something somewhat similar, an image comes to mind. Now, we won't agree on all the specifics for sure, but we kind of have an idea of what an American is. I could substitute Canadian. Certainly we think of Canadians as nicer people than Americans. Something comes to mind when I say Canadian, American, Mexican, Chinaman. Those stereotypes are fairly well defined, and they mean something. What about if I say the word Christian? Then what comes to mind? Sometimes the word Christian, depending on who you ask or the amount of different people that you ask, you get all kinds of different definitions, different ideas. If I stopped you on the street and if I asked you, hey, are you a Christian? That might be a question that you would want to qualify before you answer. Right? You might want to say, yeah, but. And then you might want to explain what you mean when you say Christian, because it's not as airtight as something like I'm an American, I'm a Mexican, I'm a Chinaman, or whatever. The word Christian is not one that has been defined very well, I'll say, and I think there's a reason for that. And really, if we're honest, and we ask people, especially people outside of our faith group who don't believe the types of things that we believe, what do you think of when you hear the word Christian? Something along these lines comes to mind. Christians are judgmental, homophobic moralists who think they're the only ones going to heaven and secretly relish the fact that everyone who disagrees with them is going to hell. I think more people than what we would want to admit think that definition is more along the lines of what a Christian is. And to be fair, sometimes our actions and our thoughts, the way we talk, the way we act, really reinforce the reason why people think that way. Now, the reason they're able to do that with the word Christian, the reason you feel the need to define the word Christian and qualify your answer before you talk about being one, is really pretty simple. The Bible doesn't use the word Christian very well. By that I mean, it's only used in the Bible 3 times. We only ever find the word Christian 3 times in the Bible, and of those 3 times, it's never defined. We're never told in Scripture, nowhere in the Bible are we told what the word Christian actually means. So if I were to say to you, hey, you're not really living like a Christian, even if I say it in love, like I don't think what you did was right, shouldn't have done the way that you did that, you zigged, you should have zagged, or whatever, and I say, that wasn't very Christian-like of you. You might come back and say, who are you? What do you mean? I think it was, because I define Christian differently than the way you define Christian. See how the problem emerges? It's an issue because it's a term that can be defined by really almost anybody. There are other terms more specific like Mormon, Baptist, Pentecostal. Those words we have more narrow definitions, and you know what I'm talking about when I say Mormon, maybe even Catholic, Baptist, Pentecostal, whatever. But Christian is a term that's up for grabs. Christian is a term that hasn't been defined very well. Anyone can define it because, as we said, the Bible doesn't define it at all. It actually started, the word Christian, started being used in a derogatory way. It was a word that was kind of pressed on top of us Jesus followers. It was a word that we didn't make up, at least the first time as we read about it historically, and I'm going to show you what I mean in a minute. It was a word that other people made up to talk about us. And then it doesn't seem like when they did it, they were trying to be kind. they weren't using it in a very good way. All right, let me give you two places. The first two places, historically, if we rewind a couple thousand years, first two times that we see the word Christian show up. First one, biblically, that we see it show up is in the book of Acts. Acts is a great book. Many of you know it's one of my favorite books. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John all tell biographies of the story of Jesus, the life of Jesus, which is fascinating if you think about it, that someone from the first century where writing and biographies really weren't that big of a deal, but somebody who lived during that time period emerged with 4 distinct biographies of his life. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are those. They all roughly begin with Christmas. They all roughly end with Easter. Right? They tell the same story, biographies of Jesus' life, but they all end right about Easter, as I say, Christmas to Easter, story of the life of Jesus. And then Acts picks up where they leave off. It's the story of what happens next after Jesus dies, is resurrected, goes up into heaven. The holiday we celebrate is Easter, right? Then the church starts, and Acts tells us about that. And here's the verse I want to read. And when he had found them, he brought him to Antioch. For a whole year they met with the church and taught a great many people. And in Antioch, the disciples were first called Christians. All right, second place that I want to point out. First, we're looking at the first emergence of the word Christian. That was the first one, biblically. Acts chapter 11, verse 26. First time we see it. Up until then, we were calling ourselves the Way. Kind of sounds like a cult. We don't use that word anymore, thankfully. But that's what we were calling ourselves. Second time, there was a Roman historian by the name of Tacitus. Now stick with me. If you don't doze off, this is actually important history, and I'm making a point. There was a Roman historian, his name was Tacitus, and he wrote biographies of quite a few Roman emperors in the 1st, 2nd century. The historian wrote this, and here's what he wrote. Consequently, to get rid of the report that Nero caught the city on fire. Consequently, to get rid of the report, Nero fastened the guilt and inflicted the most exquisite tortures on a class called Christians by the populace. Here's my point. At the risk of belaboring it, Christians didn't call themselves Christians. We called ourselves something else. As I said, we called ourselves the Way. And I'm not advocating that we go back to that. I'm not even trying to change your vocabulary with the message today. I'm just making a point. We didn't call ourselves Christians. Other people outside of our belief group called us Christians, and they didn't do it in a nice way. The Bible only uses the term Christian 3 times, and it never defines it. I've said that a couple times because I want you to hear it. It never defines it. Here's why it matters. Here's my point. If you or I or him or her or she get to define the term Christian, then you can hide behind it all day long. You can go to war in the name of Christianity. You can start a crusade in the name of Christianity. You can build an office for yourself in the name of Christianity. You can wear the badge of Christian all day long and do what you want with it because you get to define it. The Bible never does. There's no standard to hold it up against. There's no frame of reference to say, well, you call yourself that, but it's defined over here, and that doesn't match up with this. We can't do that with the word Christian. But the Bible does use a different word, and I will submit to you, it's a scary word. The Bible uses a term very consistently, I would say a very scary word, to define the people who follow Jesus. And that word is defined very tightly. All right, here it is. Many of you know the word, and you can find it all over throughout Scripture. It's used hundreds of times. Matthew 23:1 is a good example of it. Very simply, then Jesus said to the crowds and to his disciples, addressing 2 groups of people at once. All right, there's the crowds, and then there's his disciples. This is the word, if it matters, this is the word Jesus picks. He picks the word disciple. So what does it mean? What is a disciple? A disciple, very simply, is like it sounds. The word hasn't changed in 2,000 years. it means something along the lines of follower, learner, student, right? It means this. If I'm your disciple and I ask you for advice, I ask you for guidance, before you even answer me, I'm already telling you, yes. What do you want me to do? I need your help. I need your guidance. And before you tell me what the guidance and what the help is, please know that I'm going to do it because I'm your disciple. I want to know what you think, and I want to know what you think because I think what you think matters, and I want to do what you think. That's what a disciple is. Now, that's different than Christian. That's a tightly defined, different word. So now I need to ask you a question. And the question needs to be asked of myself as well. We all need to ask ourselves the question. Are you a disciple? Or are you just a Christian? Are you a disciple or are you just a Christian? Now in a minute I want to go to a well-known, intimate part of the Bible to show you how the word gets used, how it gets defined. But before I do, I want to slow down and I want to say this. Everybody look at me. I want your full attention. Because before I show you how the Bible defines the word disciple, I want to say that if the Christian church would have gotten this right and nothing else, if we would have, all the things that Jesus taught us, all the guidance he gave us, if we would have set all that aside and if we only would have gotten this one thing right that I'm about to show you, if we only got this one thing right, there would not have been a World War II. There would not have been a Civil War. There would not have been a need for a civil rights movement in the United States. If we would have taken Jesus more seriously and gotten this one word, disciple, right, and used the definition Jesus used when he gave us the word. All right, that said, in his final few days on earth, really in his last day, just shortly before the crucifixion, before he's arrested and crucified, Jesus gathers all of his followers together, his disciples, and they have a meal. They're having a final meal. Judas has already left to betray him. He's gone, so there's only 11 of them left. And he tells them that his time with them is very few. He's getting ready to go somewhere. They cannot go. That bothered Peter. Everything bothers Peter, right? So Peter kind of swells up, and Peter's like, what do you mean you're going somewhere I can't go? Why do you get to go where I can't go? I want to go where you go. I'm with you, right? Does Andrew get to go? Because if Andrew gets to go, I made that part out. If Andrew's going, I want to go. Whatever. It bothers Peter that Jesus says, I'm going somewhere soon. You can't follow me. But I'm giving you a new commandment before I go. A new commandment I give you. A new commandment I give you. Love each other as I have loved you. What? To that, I think they would say, that doesn't sound so new. To that, I say, that doesn't sound very new. In fact, Jesus already said this many times, love each other. The Old Testament has already said it many times. So what does he mean? Why does he call that new? Well, if you rewind back about 36 months from this point right here, Jesus has about 20 minutes of freedom left. They're getting ready to come and arrest him. If you go back about 36 months to when Jesus is walking around the Galilean Sea and he's picking his disciples, you. If you think to that time, we can use that to illustrate what he means when he calls this a new commandment. Remember Matthew. Let's pretend. Let's take a little literary freedom with the text here. Jesus rolls up on Matthew and he says, Matthew, I want you to come follow me. Do you remember, Matthew, what you were doing that day? Do you remember who you were? Do you remember what you were, Matthew, when I found you? Now, if you're Matthew during that conversation, you want to kind of stare at your shoes and think, yeah, I remember. I'd rather not remember. Because on that day, Matthew, when I first met you and I said, come follow me and be a part of my group, at that point, you were a pretty dirty person. Or you were a crook. You were a tax collector, and not in the terms of we think of IRS tax collector today. You were a crooked, illegal, really, you were a thief. You were a thief sanctioned by the government to steal from your own people who, by the way, hated you for doing it. Nobody liked you, Matthew. To illustrate, do the rest of you remember the day when we picked Matthew up and added Matthew to our group? Right? And Peter's like, yeah, I remember that day. Nobody was happy about it. But remember how we welcomed Matthew into remember the way I loved you, Matthew? Remember the way I knew who you were? You knew who you were. We all knew who you were. But I said, Matthew, come with us and be a part of us. I want you to love each other the way I loved Matthew that day. What about Nathaniel? Another one of the disciples. I realize it may have been a while since you've read the story of Jesus picking the disciples. It's a great story towards the beginning of the Gospels. But remember when Nathaniel first hears about Jesus and the response that Nathaniel has? Nathaniel says, from Jesus from Nazareth, can anything good come from Nazareth? Anything? It's such this small backwater hick town. Can anything good come from there? And so Nathaniel was somewhat justified to say, can anything good come from Nazareth? That's how he met Jesus, right? So Jesus could say, you remember that day, Nathaniel? You dissed my entire family, my whole hometown. You said, can anything good come out of there? You dissed my whole existence. But remember what I said to you? I said, come and follow me. Be a part of my group. Join me. And I loved you, Nathaniel. And I brought you into my group. And I accepted you way before you accepted me. I accepted you, Matthew, way before you accepted us. That's how I want you to love one another. Because now Jesus could say, I've got about 15 minutes of freedom left. And I'm out of here. They're coming to arrest me. And the next time you see me, I'm going to have holes in my hands. John 13:35. My prayer as your pastor, if I can call myself that, is that this verse would be so seared into your conscience, so burned into your memory, that a day doesn't go by without you at least unconsciously being affected by what Jesus says in John 13:35. By this, all people will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. See how tightly Jesus defines this word here? And I want us to notice, just as much as I want us to see what Jesus says, right? The world will know you're my disciples by the way you love one another. Just as much as I want us to see what he says, I want us to notice what he doesn't say. Because what he doesn't say is what we usually do say. The world will know that we're Christians by how often we go to church, by how well we can quote our Bible, by how much quiet time we have, by how much money we put in the plate when the plate goes by how nicely we dress, right? By the kinds of people that we hang out with, by the kinds of people that we don't hang out with, by how we vote, by how we don't vote. That's how we have came to define the term Christian. Jesus says, no, disciple. And disciple is defined by how well you love each other. We can all be Christians. We can all do that. We can all be conservative truth tellers. We can all be liberal, grace-centered people. We can all be Christians. But the kind of love Jesus gives to define the word disciple, that's different. There's no wiggle room. I know you're all Christians. Maybe, most of you would say you're a Christian. I don't want to read into it. Maybe you'd say, don't put me in that category. Fine. But for those of you who would put yourself in that category, let me ask you, all right, we can all be Christians. But what about disciple? Are you a disciple? One of my favorite parts of this story, we're sticking with the Passover story, they just had this intimate moment where Jesus told them, I'm about to go somewhere you can't go. Right now I've got like 11 minutes left. They're coming for me. I'm going to get arrested. I'm going to get killed. I'm going where you can't go. I want you to love each other while I'm gone. And then Peter raises his hand and he says, Lord, where are you going? Where are you going? This is really not part of the sermon, but again, pastorally, if I can give you some encouragement, don't be too hard on yourself. When you don't have an airtight view of the Bible story, don't be too hard on yourself when you read something in the Bible and you think, I have no idea what that means. Don't be too hard on yourself when you read something over and over and over again and you think, I just don't understand. Or how is it they see that so clearly and I don't? How is it she understands this and I don't understand? Don't be so hard on yourself. Because these disciples just spent the last 3 years intimately following Jesus around, hearing everything he has to say, not reading about it, but hearing it directly from him. And still, at the final hour, Peter says, where are you going? What are you doing again? Because you said you're going somewhere I can't go, and that's not the way it works, Jesus. Peter says, where you go, I go. I'm ready to go. Look, I already bought a sword. I went shopping. I got it. Here it is. I got it all sharp. It's ready to go. I want to go with you. I want to be by your side, and we're going to fight. We're going to convert. We're going to baptize. We're going to build. I would die for you, Jesus. That's the way it's going to work out. Jesus tells Peter, I don't want you to die for me. At least not yet. You're not going to go where I'm going to go, and I'm not asking you to die for me. Listen, I'm asking you to do something much harder than die for me. I'm asking you to stay right here and love these people in this room. I'm asking you to stay right here and look in the dirty faces, the sweaty faces, the sinful faces, the dishonest faces, the disgraceful faces of these people that we've been doing life with. I want you to stay here and I want you to love them. And I want you to love them so much that everybody else can look and peek into our community and say, there's something different about those people. I've said this often, I'll say it again. If I have a dream, it's that the rest of the world, and by that I mean the non-believing world, who would be quick to say, don't group me with you crazy Christians. I don't believe what you believe. Still, that those people would say, even though I don't believe what the Christians believe, I don't know why they do what they do, I don't know what they do on Sunday, I don't really care. But my dream is that they would get so close to us and they would peek into our community saying, I don't believe what you believe, I don't know why you do what you do, but I kind of hope my daughter marries one of you. Because you guys treat your wives so well. I don't think I understand or believe all the stuff you think about this Jesus guy. But I would hire every one of you to work for me because you're so honest. That's the message. That's the definition Jesus left us for what it means to follow him. All right, let me close by saying two things, and then I'm done. I got two things. One thing to those of you who would say, I'm in the group, I'm a Christian, or however you want to define it. And then one thing to those of you who would say, that's not me. To those of you who would say, I'm a Christian, or however you want to define yourself, I'm not trying to change your vocabulary. But to those of you who would say, you're a Christian, let me ask that you do an experiment for the next week. You don't have to report back to me. You don't have to raise your hand. You don't have to walk down the aisle and tell me you did it. But let me just suggest that for the next week, whenever you have a decision to make, especially one that involves friction, especially one that involves tension, and you have to actually think, what do I do? Do I zig or do I zag? At least for the next week, can you ask yourself, what would love require of me? What would love require of me in this situation? I'm not even saying you have to do the answer to that. I'm not even saying you have to follow it out and actually be obedient to it. I'm just asking you to ask the question. What would love require of me in this situation? Now, hang on. Let me anticipate your objections. Because I know your husband is a lazy jerk, and your wife is mean and doesn't respect you the way that she's supposed to, and your kids don't clean up after themselves, and your boss is a jerk, and your friends are not stable. Basically, I realize that you are the only stable person in your life. I know. Because it's the same thing for me. I'm waiting on the rest of you to catch up. Nobody has it figured out the way you do. Nobody's as nice or as kind or as smart or as loving. I get it. I realize that. Try it anyway. Just try it. What would love require of me? And don't come back and say, Bill, I did it, and my wife, she's still mean. Or my kids, they still don't pick up after themselves. Listen, this question is not a means to an end. Left us is a lifestyle. And the lifestyle he left us, if we took it seriously, could have prevented untold amounts of calamity and pain and suffering in the world. I'll save it for another follow-on message, but I will say this. When we did take it seriously, when we did simply ask, what does love require of me? Before we started using the word Christian and loosely defining it however we wanted to, when we just stuck with disciple and we just said, what does love require of me? When we did that, we had enough leverage to change the world. And it worked. Things didn't start going poorly for us. We didn't start gaining a bad reputation. We didn't start earning a bad reputation until we stopped asking that question. What does love require of me? Now, to those of you who would say, I'm not a follower of Jesus. I haven't bought into that. I'm not considering it. Maybe I am, but I'm not there yet. Maybe you're holding out on accepting him for any number of reasons. Let me first of all say, I get it. I wasn't born a Christian. I didn't grow up a Christian. I held out for a while, and I think some of my reasons for holding out are probably similar to some of your reasons for holding out. I was pretty frustrated with the way I saw people wear the label of Christian and then act very differently. I didn't like the way my Christian aunt treated my uncle. I didn't like the way my Christian neighbor cheated people. I didn't like the way my Christian friends treated, everyone else around them in school. I didn't like that. It felt very duplicitous, and it bothered me. And if nothing else, it made me say, I don't want a part of it. That inconsistency between the label, the badge that you wear, and the actions that you carry is an inconsistency that I don't want a part of. I get it. I'm not judging you. But I do want to say this. The thing you may hate about me, whether you call me a Christian or a disciple, the thing you may greatly dislike about my worldview, is the same thing you don't like about yourself. Here's what I mean by that. What you see in me, and you don't have to spend much time with me to see a lot of it in me, is an inconsistency with the things I say I believe. I wholeheartedly believe Jesus is who he said he is. It's the only thing I have going for me. And there are some convictions that come along with that, and there are some days that I flat out ignore those convictions. I am not consistent with my own standards. I have standards of my own that I don't live up to. You're right. But so do you. The very thing that you don't like about me and this group of Christians who have in some ways earned a bad reputation of hypocritical inconsistency, if you're honest with yourself, you know it's alive and well inside of you too. You have standards of your own that you don't live up to. You have things that you think are important that you don't always follow. We all do. So all I'm asking is that you don't let that common problem that common malfunction of our humanity be the barrier between what could be a much better life full of peace and joy for you. If you sit and think about this failure we all have to live up to our own standards, then it makes Jesus' command to love one another all that more profound. It makes us want to love each other anyway. Let's pray.